They're the parents who made it seem like they were welcoming a little girl into a loving home. Then, they were parents who made it seem like they were hit with the worst nightmare, losing the child that they loved so much. But now, their parents accused of the unthinkable. And the details to this story of alleged abuse, neglect, and murder will make you so angry. How police say they knew this couple's story was not adding up. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, before we get into what is, I will tell you, potentially warn you, is a very difficult story with very, very tough details to hear. I do need to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor for this episode of On the Case, truthfinder.com, because when we're putting together stories like this one, Truthfinder is an important tool for us that helps us understand more about the people who are involved in our stories. Truthfinder is a powerful public record search service that we use to do research here at Law&Crime. It's a useful resource because you can plug in a name, you get address information, criminal history, and much more, and it can give you some peace of mind. Truthfinder is one of the largest public record search services in the country, and with a paid subscription, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone, including looking up registered sex offenders in your area as well. So stay informed, stay safe, check public records with Truthfinder right now at truthfinder.com/OTC. All right, let's dive into this one. We all know at this point, if you watch this show or any of the others that we have here on Law&Crime, that social media really only tells part of the story when talking about someone. And often the story that it's telling is very far from the truth. And that is what it appears that we're dealing with here in this story that we're following out of Louisiana involving the couple you see here. Their names, Kaylee Fontenot and Taylor Broussard. Now, this young couple, it appears they got engaged at the end of 2024 per social media, Taylor proposing to Kaylee on a waterfront. Now, the couple lives in Opelousas, Louisiana. We're talking about a small town, a far cry from the streets of New Orleans, has about 15,000 people, and it's an hour west of Baton Rouge. Now, this couple got engaged, and then what happened next was they became parents. In August of this year, it appears they welcomed their baby girl. Her name, Alora Faye Broussard. This is a picture of the proud parents in the hospital with this little girl. So here is what I'm talking about when we talk about a social media perception. You have images portraying really that perfect young couple taking on the challenges and joys of parenthood, but just 2 months into that little girl's life, that perception came crashing down. All right, it was Saturday, October 25th, around 8 o'clock in the morning, that police were called to a home on North Liberty Street. Young Alora Faye wasn't breathing. This was a medical emergency and firefighters needed to act fast. They say they tried life-saving measures on the girl. They rushed her to the hospital, but that 2-month-old, just 2 months, she didn't make it. You never hope a parent would ever have to go through losing a child. Alora died that day, October 25th. Her dad, Taylor Broussard, posted on Facebook, quote, "My baby girl, my twin, and my beautiful little angel. I don't even know where to start. I'm so broken. I miss you every second of the day. You were so much like me and your mother combined. You loved to ride in the car just like me. You had your mom's attitude with my facial expressions. You're gorgeous just like your mother. Daddy misses you so much. I can barely think right now. I'm so lost in words at the moment. This still doesn't feel real. I just can't believe this could happen to my beautiful baby girl. Until we meet again, rest in peace, my angel." He posted that on October 29th. That was 4 days after his daughter died. It's obviously a very emotional post, and it's frankly deserving of the thoughts and prayers that went into the comments section. But then the autopsy came back of what authorities say really happened to young Alora. The autopsy showed that Alora was the victim of abuse and neglect during her 2-month life. So young, so short. The autopsy found that she was extremely dehydrated and malnourished. It went on to say that she had broken rib bones, and some showed signs of healing, meaning that it appears that she was not just the victim of abuse one time, that she had injuries that were healing at different times compared to other injuries on her body, according to police. Now, she also had a severed lowered spine, and that resulted in internal bleeding, and according to police, that is the 2-month-old's cause of death. Police also say, quote, through interviews, investigators identified the parents as Kaylee Fontenot and Taylor Broussard and learned that the child had been in their exclusive custody since birth. Now, it did stand out to me that police said that it took them interviews to identify the baby's parents. Does that mean that it was just a procedural issue to find out that they were the baby's parents, or were they not home at the time all of this happened? There's still a lot of details to this story that police say they're investigating, and they have yet to release information about. Arrest warrants were issued for both parents to face charges of first-degree murder, cruelty to juveniles, and second-degree battery. When police put out a news release on Facebook, this was on its Facebook page, Halloween, October 31st, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they said that Kaylee Fontenot was in custody, but her fiance, Taylor Broussard, he was still at large. And it wasn't until November 3rd, days later, that police say Taylor Broussard turned himself into the county jail. He and his fiance, they are facing the same charges, and that includes first-degree murder. Now again, there's still a lot that we do not know about this case, about the specifics that police say happened inside that home. How their daughter got those alleged injuries, we don't know at this point, and it seems that law enforcement is still trying to put together the pieces. But they do say that, again, this couple, they were the only ones who had cared for that 2-month-old in the 2 months that she was alive. Police say that this is an ongoing investigation, and the local chief posted on Facebook, quote, our hearts are with this infant who suffered unimaginable abuse. This case is in its early stages, and our investigators are working tirelessly to uncover every detail. We ask the public for patience, cooperation, and assistance in helping us pursue justice. Joining me now to talk more about this just terrible case out of Louisiana is former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Nima Rahmani. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. I know it seems pretty early in this investigation. The autopsy says a lot. What stands out to you as a former prosecutor with the type of evidence the state is going to need in this case?
Chris, thanks for having me as always, and yet another incredibly sad case we're talking about here on Law and Crime. And what really stands out to me is the young age of this child and the injuries. 2 months old, malnourishment, that's something that you see, but the broken ribs and a severed spine, I mean, that's just unconscionable to me how that can happen with any child, much less a 2-month-old child. The physical abuse, I can't even wrap my head around it, to suffer those types of injuries that early. I mean, we've all seen newborns. I mean, they're wrapped up. You're essentially doing everything you can to protect them. And the fact that this young baby suffered these injuries leads me to believe that they were just the subject of significant abuse.
Yeah, and I found the Facebook page for both of them, and I know social media only tells part of the story, and for people who watch this show and Law and Crime, that's something we talk about often, but it's like, you see them at the hospital with this baby, and then it's just 2 months later. I mean, that's such a short period of time for these injuries. At the same time, I know police have said that through interviews, they determined that exclusively this couple, Taylor Broussard and Kaylee Fontenot, they're the only people who had the care of this child. How strong is that, though, as a tie to say that, yes, they're the parents, yes, the baby was in their custody, but these injuries that you see, it is because of these two people?
Well, it is. When a child is this young and there's no one else that has access to them, there's no argument that this happened at school or at daycare or there's some caregiver, right? I mean, this child was in the custody of the parents the entire time. That means that really no one else could have caused these injuries. So I'm sure there's going to be finger pointing between mom and dad. There really always is. But that's the only possible defense here. It's not like there's some third party that we're not aware of that had access to this child, again, unless there's some evidence that we don't know about.
I might be jumping ahead on this, but I could tell, again, from social media that they were engaged. I don't think that they were married. How does it work, say if one wants to turn on the other? Typically, is there any sort of, it's not attorney-client privilege, but if you're married to someone, does that factor into whether or not you can testify against them in a case like this?
So there's two types of privileges that apply to married couples. Don't apply to folks who are just engaged. There's the marital privilege, there's the spousal privilege. They're somewhat similar, but one of the privileges protects confidential communications during the course of the marriage. So no one can compel one spouse to reveal those communications in either a civil or a criminal case. And in fact, even if one spouse wants to, the other spouse can prevent it. And that's the marital privilege, sometimes called the marital communications privilege. Then there's the spousal privilege, which generally only applies in criminal cases. And it says that the state can't compel one spouse to testify against the other at a criminal trial. Now, that's not just limited to the marital communications. It's related to anything. Now, the spouse who has been asked to testify can voluntarily choose to testify against the other spouse. So, again, not saying anything would apply here because they weren't married, but for instance, let's say mom wanted to testify against the dad and she wanted to do so, she absolutely could, but dad might be able to limit any discussion of any confidential communications between them.
They're both facing first-degree murder charges. For there to be any sort of premeditation in this case, how do you prove that? I mean, this child has only been alive and it's, just keep coming back to it. It's so hard to comprehend that this baby was just 2 months old and lost its life. But how do you prove there's that premeditation? You clearly have some horrific injuries, but how do you prove that it wasn't, like we've seen in so many cases, some moment of frustration, a parent says, where they just acted out of frustration and anger, but that this was actually something premeditated over time?
Chris, I think the important factor here is not just the orthopedic injuries, but the malnourishment, right? Obviously, accidents can happen. A kid can fall. A kid could be struck. On one instance, I'm not saying that's ever justified. You should never strike a child, especially a newborn. But the malnourishment, that's not something that happens, once, right? That's something that happens over the course of hours, days, even weeks in this case. So that shows the intent, in my opinion. The fact that the child was malnourished, wasn't given formula, wasn't given breast milk, wasn't fed. Obviously, the child's too young to have any solid food at that age. That leads me to believe that this was something that was intentional, not just accidental or one instance.
For the defense, and I know you don't try cases like this as a defense attorney or a former federal prosecutor, but is there a defense out there to say, well, yes, it was our baby, the baby's 2 months old, legally we were in care of the baby, but then perhaps raising the suspicion that there could be this other suspect out there where, hey, they were actually, this baby, she was actually in the care of this person, and so you can't prove that I was the person that did this, that caused this specific injury. How do you push back against that type of defense if you're the prosecution?
That's what we call the real killer defense. Look, it happens. We see it a lot in murder cases. And obviously, the prosecution has the burden of proof. But, again, jurors aren't stupid, right? They know that the parent's job is to take care of a child, especially a newborn child. And you start pointing the fingers without any evidence or substantiation whatsoever to the boogeyman. That tends to result in a pretty quick guilty verdict. Now, if there is some evidence that another caretaker, grandparent, or relative, someone had access to the child, maybe. But again, what strikes me about this case is the malnourishment, plus the broken ribs, plus the severed spine, right? This isn't just one incident with one person. I mean, who had care of this child for the 2 months that it was alive? And it's going to be the parents. So I don't see any situation where you can really credibly defend this case without pointing at the other parent.
And let's talk about that because, these two, they are new parents and I'm not sure what their relationship is. It seems like they were, at least on the surface, happy together, but they're in a case now where they're both facing first-degree murder charges. How does it work where I know it's whoever gets the deal, races to go get the deal first, but how does that actually play out if one of them says, no, the other was the one who actually did it and I just witnessed it? I know we've talked about other cases that kind of have that dynamic at play.
Yeah, it's the classic prisoner's dilemma, right? The person who rats first tends to get the best deal. Now, they're going to get time. They're going to get significant time. But if you're looking at the charges here, we talked about the murder under Louisiana law. That carries the potential death penalty. And one of the aggravating factors that prosecutors consider is murder of a child under the age of 12. Well, this is not 12 years old, this is 2 months old. So that's a very significant aggravating factor. I'm not saying this isn't going to be a death penalty case necessarily, but that's certainly something that prosecutors are going to consider. But then you start looking at the lesser charges, right? You look at I believe it's a second degree cruelty to a child that carries a 40-year sentence. Then there's cruelty to a child that carries a potential 20-year sentence. So if you are defending this case, you might be trying to work out some sort of deal, maybe a 20-year deal where you testify against the other spouse, maybe the more culpable spouse in this case, to try to not get your client off, but to present some sort of evidence of mitigation. I don't really know what there is here. I mean, this is really the cardinal sin, to kill your own child. I can't think of anything worse. But, defense attorneys have to do their job. And in a case like this, you're never going to get a walk, I don't think. You're never going to get a not guilty. So all you're trying to do is maybe save your client from spending the rest of their life in prison, or maybe even being on death row.
The father, Broussard, because it was on Halloween, October 31st, I think it was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, police put out the alert that these parents had been, they're going to be facing these charges. The mom, Fontenot, she was in custody, but it wasn't until November 3rd that the father actually turned himself into police, and he, ends up surrendering at the county jail. But when you're presenting a case to a jury, how much does that matter? That this arrest warrant was out, his wife was the one who was in custody, and he was the one who was on the run in the eyes of the police for roughly 4 days until, yes, he eventually turned himself into the authorities.
It's a big deal. In every single state in this country, there's a jury instruction that says flight is evidence of consciousness of guilt. That's something the jurors can consider. And in this case, I believe the child died on October 25th, if I recall correctly. And of course, you have this period of time where the father reportedly tried to evade law enforcement. So that's something that, of course, judges are going to consider when deciding to issue bail. This should be a no bail case, obviously a murder case, someone who's tried to flee the jurisdiction, someone who's dangerous to even his own child. But absolutely, that's something jurors can consider, because people that are guilty, they tend to run. And apparently that's what happened here.
I noticed too in the injuries, according to the autopsy, where you have the malnourishment, so that's something over a period of time, but then the ribs that were broken, and it's just so tough to talk about this, but they were in different stages of healing, which I know from previous stories we've talked about, shows that this wasn't just a one-time thing, according to the police. When it comes to determining the death penalty and whether, say they go to trial, they say, they're going to try their hand at this, maybe prosecutors say we have the evidence that we can just take this to trial and throw the book at you at the highest level of punishment we can get in the death penalty. The fact that it wasn't a one-time deal, how does that, like broken ribs that are healing in various stages, how does that factor into whether or not this is a death penalty case?
I think that is a very significant aggravating factor. And again, there's only one victim here, but that victim was abused over a period of time. And I mean, we've talked about in previous cases, obviously I'm not a doctor, but you have the medical examiners, you have the orthopedic surgeons, the specialists come in and they testify that these injuries occurred on different parts of the body or in the same part of the body over a period of time. There's a consistent pattern of abuse such that this kid was tortured over the short course of, their life. I mean, it is a really, really big deal. And that's something that I think the prosecution will pound, whether it's at trial or at sentencing.
And this is another, morbid question, but that's just kind of, what this story is, sadly, because there were so many injuries. How specific in a trial does the defense get if they want to argue that it was someone else who was responsible for the ribs, and then this other person was responsible for the severed spine, and another person was responsible for the abuse, and you're trying to pick a way to defend your client that, this was this person, this was that. I could also see a jury just getting exhausted and feel like they're just getting, kind of having one, pulled behind them. How does that work with, maybe the defense does have that type of argument that they can make, but then at the same time, you have a jury that's going to say, I just don't believe it.
Yeah, and again, I've seen it, and everyone's entitled to a legal defense, and sometimes we go to trial, and we call it a slow guilty plea or a long form guilty plea, where the prosecution just keeps presenting their evidence the defense denies it because their client refuses to accept anything, right? And they come up with this really sort of fantastic story, how these injuries could have occurred in some other way. They attack the medical causation in the case. I mean, I've really seen it all. In almost 25 years I've been doing this, but the result is going to be the same, whether it's a guilty plea or whether it's a conviction at trial. I mean, the evidence tends to be so overwhelming that oftentimes, you'll get guilty verdicts in even less than an hour in these types of cases if the defense does make these types of arguments.
And we'll see the argument that this couple, brings forward, whether it's a plea deal or whatever it may be, whatever the explanation, and I can't imagine there is one for what the autopsy says happened to this 2-month-old child. Just a horrible case out of Louisiana. But Nemo Romani, I know these are not easy to talk about, former federal prosecutor, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Of course, Chris. Thanks for having me. As always, talk to you soon.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.